Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me? All good? Cool. Brilliant. What an absolute pleasure to be here. So what I'm going to talk about today, my background is in sustainability and environmentalism, and I'm going to talk about my background and pathway towards environmentalism and that as my career path and how that ultimately has led me to veganism. I'm then also going to talk about some of the enormous global environmental impacts of animal agriculture and talk about some seriously, not yay, but yay that we're talking about it, right? And, you know, I've got some examples in there that I've researched which are actually really shocking. So I want to make it really graspable and realistic for people. And then finally, I want to finish by talking about the amazing benefits that a plant-based lifestyle can have on our environment and our world. So a little bit about me first. I'm originally here from Adelaide. I was born and grew up here. I no longer live here. I actually live just outside of Byron Bay, and I've travelled around a bit. And I was actually in a workshop yesterday, a panel session, and I introduced myself and I said I'm a vegan sustainability manager living on an organic fruit farm outside of Byron Bay. So I'm essentially a walking cliche for that region, but I love it. It's fantastic. And so I grew up here in Adelaide, and as we all do when we leave high school, no one really knows what they want to do. No one has a really clear passion and purpose in the world. You just sort of graduate and, fall into a uni degree, or at least I did. And I just fell into an engineering degree, not really knowing what or why or the reason why I wanted to do it, and just sort of, put in a couple of years of engineering and study. And then I landed a job here in Adelaide with a big international manufacturing company, pretty cushy student internship job, setting me on a bit of a career path for, engineering and manufacturing, and I absolutely hated it. I was going in there day after day, not aligned to what we were making, not aligned to the values of the company, sitting at a desk, just like cushy kind of like student engineering work, and I hated it. And that's what really started to get me thinking about, well, what do I want to do? What is my purpose? What am I passionate about? And what do I want to commit to working towards? So churned for a few months in that role and really went through a process of trying to connect with something, trying to find some sort of purpose, and really started to connect with nature and environment and the outdoors. And that's when I went, okay, well, maybe I should follow that. So on an absolute whim, I quit my cushy student intern engineering job and went to be a street fundraiser for a conservation charity. So quite literally on a Friday, I was sitting at this corporate desk, cushy, just easy, on a career path, quit, and then on a Monday, I'm out on the street trying to get your credit card details for a charity. And bit of a shock to the system, bit of a baptism of fire, but even though that was a really difficult job, and it was hard facing constant rejection day after day, I felt like I was contributing. I had a bit of a higher purpose now, and I felt like I was at least doing something that I was aligned to and passionate about. So I did that for 6 months, and I was actually reasonably okay at it. I think because I had that passion and that cause, that commitment to the cause. And then I went, okay, I'm going to go back to uni, finish my degree, focus on a career path, and I really, really honed in on environmentalism and sustainability. And I got a degree in environmental engineering, graduated from Brisbane, moved over to New Zealand, and got a job pretty much straight away with a global international food and beverage manufacturing company as a sustainability officer. So here I am, I'm working for this big multinational corporate. I'm doing environmental or sustainability projects focusing on water reduction and energy reduction, wastewater treatment. And I was really happy. I thought I was killing it. I actually had this one moment where I stepped into our big corporate office, glass windows, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, in my beautiful leather shoes, button-up business shirt, and I remember kind of thinking like, I've made it. I'm doing it. I'm doing something I'm passionate about, and I'm successful, and I'm on a successful career path, and this is great. And then something happened which completely changed my worldview and the way I looked at the world. and that was I became a father. So up until this point, I'd actually been vegetarian for about 4 years. But the reason I was vegetarian was because it was really self-focused and self-centered. It was like, I feel better for my health, and even when I thought I was being ethical, I reflect on it now, and I really wasn't. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about the animals. You know, I don't have to worry about where my meat comes from. It's such a weight off my shoulders. So I had my newborn baby boy, and instantly, all of a sudden, I'm now responsible and accountable for someone else's well-being. And that was the first time in my life that I felt that, and it changed something in the way I was thinking and able to view the world. And where we were living at the time was on a small rural community, and our neighbours were had all hobby farms, and New Zealand rolling countryside, beautiful green rolling hills, roaming cows, dairy cows all over these pastures, and it was one of the most beautiful scenic environments. And I remember this one moment, the penny dropped, where I'm holding my newborn baby boy, a few days old, and looking at the farm next door, the hobby farm next door, where it was calving season, and this mother cow had just had a baby calf, and about 4 days after that baby calf was born, it had been separated from its mother so that the farmer can milk this cow. And I was standing there with my newborn baby boy in my arms, looking at this new calf that's been separated from its mother, listening to the mother cow crying for its baby calf, and going, if that's the best situation, if that's the best example of farming, I'm not okay with that. And I don't want to be a part of that. The other major thing that happened at that point in time, it all happened at the same time, was that multiple reports and international studies were coming out about the climate and ecological impacts that livestock and animal agriculture has on our world. And a doco dropped, which I'm sure most of us have heard of or seen, called Cowspiracy. And being so passionate about nature and environmentalism, and then watching Cowspiracy, and then having that moment with my baby boy and watching the animals next door, it just all culminated in me going, I've got to change my lifestyle. We've got to change our family's lifestyle overnight. And we've just got to separate ourselves from that industrialized system. And then I went back to work. And after going through all this massive change in just a matter of a couple of weeks, I went back to work, and all of a sudden, focusing on reducing energy loss by a couple of percentage points on a refrigeration pump didn't seem so inspiring or so meaningful. And I started to go, well, hang on. I've been focusing so much on, trying to reduce the tiniest little fraction of energy efficiency or trying to get the tiniest little bit of water efficiency out of certain equipments in our facility. But I'm only really fiddling at the margins. If I really am really passionate and motivated to make an absolute massive impact environmentally and sustainability in the sustainability world, I've got to focus on what the biggest environmental destructive industry is in the world, which is animal agriculture. And essentially that's why I'm here today. This is my first talk in a more public setting, especially on the topic of veganism and plant-based diets. I've done a lot of other talks, sort of corporate and business world, but I've just decided that that's not enough, and I've got to start spreading the message in this forum and on this topic. So that's why I'm here. I want to talk a little bit about the impacts, the environmental impacts of animal agriculture now, and share some examples with you. Quite often we hear, when we talk about environmentalism or sustainability, quite often the argument or the point is raised that there's an overpopulation issue in our world. And absolutely, I think there is. We're 7+ billion humans and growing rapidly on this world, and absolutely using an enormous amount of resources unsustainably. We can't maintain it. But as well as the human population issue, there's also an enormous farmed animal overpopulation issue. So we currently have 7.5 or so billion humans in the world. Every year, globally, we as humans raise and slaughter 70 billion animals, farmed animals. 70 billion farmed animals globally, and if you equate that to seconds, it's 1,500 animals every second. So if you count to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7,500 animals were just farmed, raised and killed globally. And it's quite often to think, especially here in Australia, go, well, that's globally. How can I, it's so far out of sight, out of mind. In Australia, it's different. In Australia, we're much smaller. We have less impact. We're more sustainable. Not really. In Australia, we raise and kill 1.5 million farmed animals every single day. Every single day. And the ethical atrocity of that is horrific. That's not my expertise. I feel very strongly about it, but there are some amazing documentaries and some amazing speakers, many of whom are here today, like James Aspey, Joey Carbstrong, those guys, who will talk to you about the ethical atrocity of what happens in that industry. From a sustainability and resource use point of view, can you imagine the amount of resources it takes to raise and kill 1.5 million animals in this country every single day? Think of all of the land required to grow the food and to run those animals on. Think of all of the water that's needed to raise crops, to raise food, to feed those animals, to use in the process. Think of all of the waste generated, all of the emissions generated, even just the opportunity cost, people's time. Think of all the investment of money, of time and resources of people to farm, to raise, to transport, to slaughter, to clean, to package, to deliver, to sell. 1.5 million animals every day. It's actually so big that it's hard to comprehend. So I've tried to think of some like-for-like examples so that it's more comprehensible, so it's easier to understand. So let's start with land use. A report came out literally just this week, a few days ago, on the ABC, which talked about how Australia is the number 2 worst country in the world when it comes to biodiversity loss. And this is current, this is 2017. The number 1 cause of biodiversity loss is habitat destruction from land clearing, and the number 1 cause of land clearing is animal agriculture. And this is not land that's previously been cleared, this is still happening. We're still clearing land in 2017 here in Australia. So we're the number 2 worst country in the world behind Indonesia in terms of biodiversity and species loss. So this is land that we're using to essentially raise livestock that could otherwise be used alternatively to grow other forms of food, plant foods, and or could also be used for native vegetation and revegetation and would then act as a new habitat and a carbon sink. So land use is enormous, enormous. Water use. It's estimated in Australia that animal agriculture industry uses 6,000 gigalitres of water every year. Now, what the hell does 6,000 gigalitres look like? It's enough water to fill 2.5 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. So every year, the animal agriculture industry in Australia in 2017 is using enough water to fill 2.5 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. And it's been shown that plant-based diets use at least 1/3 less water. In fact, there are studies that have been done here in Australia by Australian universities that have studied this exact method, this exact topic. And there was one, I remember the quote, the conclusion from the researchers when they were comparing the water efficiency of diets, and they said, quote, "Certainly, the water efficiency of plant-based diets and vegetable production is startling." That was Charles Sturt University. So 6,000 gigalitres of water. I grew up here in South Australia through a time of drought and water restrictions. I remember if you had a nice looking front yard that was nice and green because you'd watered it, you had to put a little sign up to say, "We use bore water" or "We use rainwater," because otherwise your neighbours would tell on you. And when you think about it, it's crazy because 90%, 9 out of 10 litres of water that we use in our household is actually through our food. So by far the biggest water user, the biggest water consumption is our food, and most of that is through, or a significantly higher proportion of that is through the animal agriculture industry. And if we weren't using that water in animal agriculture, it would naturally be able to find its way through aquifers, restoring our ecosystems. You know, again, I grew up here and I remember hearing about the Murray and the levels in the Murray just dropping and dropping and dropping. So imagine how much water we could replenish. So 1.5 million animals every day. The amount of waste generated by 1.5 million animals raised and killed every day is disgusting. It's horrific. It's 1,000 tons a day. Again, 1,000 tons of waste a day, it's really hard to understand. What does that look like? So what I did was I calculated the square kilometres that is, how much land area that could cover. And I figured out that you could cover the entire regional area of Adelaide in 16 days with just the waste that's produced from the amount of animals that we farm in Australia. So think of every park, every street, every building, every road, every backyard. You could cover every square metre of this entire city with 16 days worth of animal waste. So that's waste that is either finding its way into waterways or somehow, you know, not being treated generally. Generally, wastewater and waste management is not very prevalent in the animal agriculture industry here in Australia. So massive source of pollution, especially water pollution. And the fourth impact that I want to give an example on is greenhouse gas emissions. And this is such a hard concept to quantify and to grasp your head around. I've been working in the sustainability field for over 6 years and I still don't know what a ton of CO2 looks like. But essentially, animal agriculture industry, just the livestock industry, generates 55 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. Now, if we were to compare that to how many people could fly from Adelaide to Melbourne, it's over 1 billion. That sounds ridiculous. It actually sounds wrong, but I'm not making this up. I've pulled these references from the Department of Environment and from the ABS. So you could essentially fly 1 billion people from Adelaide to Melbourne. So you could fly the entire population of Adelaide to Melbourne 800 times in a year, and only then would you generate the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as all of the livestock do in this country. So it's a bit depressing. I'm looking at a few faces and people are like, oh, shit. So what I've tried to do is really focus on the enormous positive impact that a plant-based diet and lifestyle can have. And what I've come to realize is that the number one most powerful decision that you can make for our environment is what you eat. Eating a plant-based lifestyle doesn't just benefit your health, doesn't just avoid harm to animals, it is the most powerful decision that you can make. And I've got one more example to share with you to try to highlight that positive impact. Elon Musk and Tesla are building the world's biggest battery storage system in the world in our backyard here in South Australia. It's being touted to be able to power 8,000 homes for a day and store 129 megawatt hours of electricity. So 129 megawatt hours of electricity, if we assume that that's going to offset emissions from natural gas production, because natural gas is the primary fossil fuel used here in South Australia, the amount of emissions that battery can store, or the amount of electricity that battery can store, if that negates production from gas, the amount of emissions that would save is the equivalent to 15 vegan diets for 1 year. It's a bit of an interesting statistic to get your head around, but basically what I'm saying is that only 15 people eating plant-based for 1 year will save the same amount of emissions that the world's biggest battery storage system could store to offset gas production at any given time. Amazing. It's actually incomprehensible. So one person does have an impact. And if we think about this festival, I'm being told that there was about 12,000 visitors last year. There's probably more this year. If we could think about if every single one of those people came and left eating a vegan plant-based lifestyle, or at least partially a vegan and plant-based lifestyle, think of the enormous impact we as a collective would have. So this is my take-home point, is that you don't have to be Elon Musk to have a positive impact on our environment. You don't have to invest a lot of time and money, and you don't have to go and do a massive project. You don't have to go and do some crazy thing. In fact, the most powerful thing you can do, the most powerful decision you can make is the next one when you choose to eat something. And the great thing is you can do it now, and it's not even difficult. It's actually fun. You can go have a delicious veggie burger, and you're having the biggest environmental impact that you could possibly have. So that's the message that I want to start sharing, and I really want to drive home and get everyone across, because that they say at the end of Cowspiracy, you can't be an environmentalist and keep eating meat. It's just the biggest global environmental impact, not just in terms of emissions, across a broad spectrum of environmental issues. So go and eat a veggie burger and give yourself some props for being an environmentalist. Thank you.